Good evening. I'm Diana Martin. I'm the Executive Director here at Hourglass. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's forum, Stronger Lancaster, with Chuck Marohn, founder and president of Strong Towns. This fall, Hourglass celebrated our 25th anniversary. Woo, yeah, big milestone. Hourglass was founded to focus on quality of life issues for Lancaster County. The question we've been working to answer is how can our community grow in the most socially, economically, and environmentally responsible way? One thing we've discovered is that in a rapidly changing world, we can't rely on effective problem solving from national or state governments. Communities like Lancaster need to take ownership of our own future, imagining better paths and pursuing solutions that take advantage of reliable information and innovative ideas. That's one of the reasons I'm excited to bring Strong Towns to Lancaster today. Like Hourglass, tonight's speaker has been focused on growth and development and thriving cities and towns for many years. And as we'll hear tonight, he has found that building a prosperous America is a hyper-local undertaking that starts from the bottom up. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much to our generous sponsors who you can see behind me on the screen, who's made this week's presentations possible. Without any further ado, let's welcome Chuck Marohn, urban planner, engineer, author, and best known as the founder and president of Strong Towns, who will highlight some of the most powerful stories in his book. Here he is. He's the guy on the poster. Chuck's going to highlight some of the most powerful stories from his book, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. I missed the cue there.
Thanks for being here. So he's the guy from the poster. So.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's very, very nice. Very kind. Yeah, I kind of missed you said, welcome, Chuck Marohn. I'm like, oh, I better get out there. And then, thank you. It is very nice to be here. I will say, I love Pennsylvania cities. Yeah, no, seriously. I am going to say a couple things here at the top before we get into it. Whenever I come out here to the Northeast, but specifically to Pennsylvania, I'm just overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of your cities. Your cities have this traditional, natural beauty to them. And I suspect, because I have relatives that live in Colorado, and if you've ever been out to Colorado and driven through the Rockies, it's one of these things where your mouth is agape the whole time. You're looking around going, what natural beauty. And then I look over at my brother-in-law and he's just driving because it's every day to him, right? Like it just blends into the background. And for me, it's stunning. Minnesota, where I'm from, is a very flat state. If we went out at random and took 2 blocks of your core downtown and somehow magically transported them to central Minnesota, it would be a place that people would drive for, 100 miles to come to. That's what you have here in abundance. You have this in abundance, and it's astounding. You also have some of the oddest things that I've ever run into. I struggle to understand your Department of Transportation. I was at your Capitol once in Harrisburg, and they were taking me in to meet some people. And as we're walking in, they said, well, we're going over here. And I'm like, well, aren't we going into the Capitol? And they're like, well, this tiny building is the Capitol. Well, what's that massive building? Well, that's our Department of Transportation. I'm like, okay, well, now it makes sense to me. Now I grasp and understand the pecking order here. I was also giving a talk once in Allentown, which again is a very lovely city. I was told before my talk, I shouldn't have been told this. I was told before my talk that the 2 prior mayors were in prison and the current mayor was under investigation. I'm going to tell you, and I don't say this in an air of superiority in any way, but those things don't happen in Minnesota. That was pretty astounding to me. We have other problems, but we don't have that problem. So I was up and I was asked a question about this big project, and I was told as part of it, that the mayor was a big supporter of this large project. And of course, having been primed, I should have referenced my Kahneman, having my mind primed about people going to prison, I made some remark in my comments about understanding that the current mayor is under some suspicion, and then I answered the question as best I could. The next person to ask a question stood up and said, "Hi, I'm the mayor." I'm like, okay, this is very weird. So we'll try to avoid all that tonight and just focus on how wonderful of a place this is. I want to talk about strong towns, and I want to talk about cities and how we make them stronger, more prosperous, more successful. To do that, I want to start with this idea of complexity. Everybody in this room recognizes that a rainforest is a complex system. We look at a rainforest and we see a bunch of flora and fauna. They all act independently of each other. They're all able to respond to stress and stimulus in the environment. When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that it has a certain order to it, but we know that that order is not imposed on it. That is an order that arises from all of those complex interactions. When we think of complex systems, though, we don't often think of cities, particularly cities of the past. Cities of the past have all the characteristics of complex adaptive systems. Individuals working autonomous from each other, coming together, having an order that emerges out of their complex interactions. These are complex adaptive systems. A complex system is very different, is very different from a system that is merely complicated. A Rube Goldberg machine is very complicated, right? There's a lot of things going on. The complication is kind of the novelty of a Rube Goldberg machine. But we all understand that if you cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the machine doesn't adapt and change. It doesn't evolve. A new order doesn't emerge. It just breaks. It just stops working. We recognize that a car engine is a very complicated machine. There's a lot of stuff that went into it, but people who built automobile engine is very, very intelligent. But if you stress an automobile engine beyond its capacity, it doesn't evolve and become a toaster or a wash machine. It just stops being a good engine, right? It just breaks. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. When we build systems that are complex, they have a capacity to evolve and adapt. We know that if a rainforest gets a little too much sun or a little too much rain in any one season, it doesn't collapse, it doesn't fail. The flora and fauna will change and adapt, and we might see a little bit different pattern form, but it'll still be a rainforest. But take a cornfield and give it too much sun or too much rain in any one season, and what happens? You don't get soybeans, you don't get potatoes, you just get bad corn, you just get failed corn. This is the same kind of thing we see in our development pattern. When we have systems that are complex and adaptive, when they are able to evolve and adapt and change in an organic kind of way, what we see is that cities become strong. They become fiscally strong, they become prosperous, they become places that are responsive to us. When we treat systems as if they are, or cities as if they are machines, as if they are things that are just a matter of putting in ingredients, pipes, roads, zoning classifications, building codes, money, what we get out of them are systems that lack that adaptability, lack that flexibility. They become, in a word, fragile. This is my hometown. I think I said this, that I'm from Minnesota. I don't know if I said the city. I'm from a city called Brainerd, Minnesota. Anybody heard of Brainerd, Minnesota? Wow. From the movie Fargo? Okay. The least flattering way to hear about my city. This is what it looked like in 1871. And for those of you who who have not had the good fortune to travel west and who are very used to the development pattern here. We all, of course, know that the country developed from east to west. And so my city was founded in 1871 after many things in your city had already reached a certain level of maturity. This is what my city looked like essentially at its founding. I want you to look at this little set of pop-up shacks here and recognize that this is essentially the starting position of every city throughout all of human history, up until the kind of post-World War II experiment that we've been on. Every single city began as a series of little bets. People would show up in a place, they would take whatever building materials they had on hand, and they would literally just like throw up the cheapest little buildings that they could get away with to try to see if this place could start to go. Something could happen. We built thousands of these across North America, and for a variety of complex reasons, a lot of these places failed. This didn't work out. What happens when a place like this doesn't work out? Do we have a banking crisis? Is there unemployment skyrocketing? Do we have to, have huge bailouts? Does the stock market crash? Of course not, right? These are little bets. But when a place like this is successful, when all those kind of complex variables come together, what we see is that it grows, and it grows in an organic kind of way. Think of a culture in a petri dish. It grows incrementally up, incrementally out, and becomes incrementally more intense. It starts to thicken up over time. The actual mechanism here, if we think about it just from a purely financial standpoint, these little buildings are not going to last very long, right? These are pretty hastily built places. They start to fall apart. As more and more people move to the city, though, the land value underneath those buildings starts to become more valuable, right? As more and more people are there, the land value goes up. It's that combination of rising land values and the structures starting to decline that creates this natural redevelopment pressure. And what we get over time is a street that will look like this. This is the same exact street about 34 years later. In fact, I will say this, I was here in 2013, and I can't remember what city it was in Pennsylvania, but I used to say that this picture was from 1901. And some smart aleck, because this always happens when you're online, some smart aleck emailed me and said, nope, you are lying. That picture is from 1904. And he had all kinds of reasons why. And I just remembered that dude was from Pennsylvania. So this picture's from 1904. This is the same street. Factually accurate. I want you to recognize that if we went out a couple blocks off of this street, what the development pattern would look like, right? It's going to look something like this. As the city continued to grow up and grow out incrementally, you would see this almost like bell curve style of development where the edge would be where the startup kind of stuff was and the core would be where you had things that were more mature. Over time then, the city would continue to grow. More and more people would move. These buildings would start to show their age. And as more and more people moved to the city, the center of town became really valuable. That land was going up in value, and people would ultimately buy these buildings and replace them with structures made of brick and marble. This is the same street, taken maybe like 40-some years later after this shot here. Again, if you went a couple blocks off of this street in any direction, it's going to look like this, right? That level of intensity. And if you went a couple blocks off of that, even more, it was going to look like this again. This is that culture growing in a petri dish. The city, in a complex, adaptive way, becoming stronger and more prosperous over time. At the end of World War II, we embarked on a completely different experiment in how to build cities. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to give you a snapshot of what this street looks like today. Yeah, that's the proper response. This photo is taken from roughly this spot here. So you're looking at the same street. It is a kind of wasteland of half-occupied buildings and parking lots. And if you want to grasp in one image why our cities struggle financially, recognize, and I don't know if we said this either, but I'm burdened with being an engineer. So I did municipal engineering for many years early in my career. This little street right here, if you add up all the public investment there, about $500,000. The street, the sidewalk, the pipes, the drainage system, the street lights, all that stuff. You've got about $500,000 of public investment in that bit of street. Where is the wealth that we are going to tap into to sustain that investment? Where's the wealth that we tap into to fix that street, fix those sidewalks, repair those street lights? The wealth used to be there, right? Used to be there in spades. It no longer is. And this is the story we're here to talk about tonight. How did this happen? And what are we going to do about it now? We call this the Suburban Experiment. And I use those words very intentionally because this was a brand, cities have always had suburbs. That stuff out on the edge has always been suburban. But at the end of World War II, here in North America, we embarked on this very different development approach, something that no other society anywhere in the world has ever tried to do. We turned our cities from complex, adaptive, kind of bottom-up places to places that were ordered very much from the top down in order to achieve certain economic ends. The way I like to think about it is this, because this is me. I always feel like we need to be generous to the people in the past. Often we are very generous to ourselves and dismissive of people in the past. I think we need to be the opposite of that. I think about the Great Depression. I think about my grandfather. He was a Marine in World War II. He was one of the first into Nagasaki after they dropped the bomb, so that gives you a sense of his age. He grew up in the Great Depression, and he would tell me about it. I asked him questions, and he would talk about how difficult the Great Depression was. And he said he had it very fortunate because the neighbors up the road allowed him to move in and sleep in the barn. They fed him, and in exchange, he worked the farm. And I remember him saying that he was very fortunate. I remember the exact words, like, I was very fortunate because I got to sleep in the barn in Minnesota. That doesn't seem fortunate to me, but that was his measurement of fortune. What I took away from that, in a big sense, is that the Great Depression was really hard in a way that we struggle to grasp today. I look back at the time and recognize that people didn't understand what caused the Great Depression. Even today, we debate the causes, right? There's no clear-cut cause. You can read one economist and they'll write a paper that says, here's the cause of the Great Depression. And you'll read another economist that writes a paper saying the exact opposite. And you'll read them both and you'll be like, they're both very smart, right? We don't know what caused it. They certainly did not know. Even more important, they didn't know how to get out of the Great Depression. The entire New Deal project was an attempt to just try different things to see, can we figure out this complex system? Can we get it moving again? The thing that got us out of the Great Depression, or so we're told in middle school, was World War II, right? Which the only way that makes sense is if you are an economist, right? I mean, look at this for a second. Step back and look at it, because we're all taught this, right? This is what got us out of the Great Depression is World War II. We're in, economic malaise, economic depression, unemployment. Yay, global war, right? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? We go from this economic hardship to sending millions of people overseas to kill and to die, mobilizing millions of others to build the ships, the planes, the munitions, all the stuff that was needed for that to happen. We were rationing gas, we were rationing butter, we were rationing sugar, we were rationing meat. This was not anyone's vision of prosperity, right? But if you were a bean counter in Washington, D.C., or if you were a bean counter on Wall Street, and you didn't care at all about human suffering, you were just looking at economic statistics, World War II solved the problem of the Great Depression. It got the economy moving again. Towards the end of the war, it was very clear that we were going to prevail. It's just a matter of time. And the economists around the president started to convene and really freak out about what was going to happen. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, one of the chief economists advising FDR. He wrote in a memo, were the war to end suddenly, there would be ushered in the greatest period of unemployment and industrial dislocation which any economy has ever faced. In other words, if we bring all these troops home and shut down all these industries, we're just going to go right back to the middle of the Great Depression. Like nothing is different than it was 10 years ago. Nothing is different. We shut all this stuff down and we're just going to go right back to where we were. Is that what happened? No, right? That's not what happened. What happened is we did something completely different. What happened is we took all of that capacity, we took all of the wealth we had accumulated, we took all of the, in a sense, cultural goodwill that we had for each other. When you fight common enemies, you start to like your neighbor more. We took all of that and recognize where the U.S. was at the end of World War II. We say global superpower. That understates it. We were the only major industrial power not decimated by war. We had more oil coming out of the ground than Saudi Arabia. We literally had the world's gold. They shipped it to us for safekeeping. We had the world's reserve currency. We had a population united against common enemies. And we took all of this capacity and we said, we are going to grow our economy and create a thriving middle class and a new version of America by transforming our cities into engines of growth. And that's what we did. We made our cities into kinetic growth machines. We poured money into infrastructure, we poured money into housing, we poured money into building businesses, we poured money into making cities grow very fast as a way to avoid a second Great Depression. And here's the amazing thing. It worked, right? I can see some of you, I can't see all of you. You seem friendly. I'm going to say, I'll say something. When I start to get comfortable with a crowd, I tend to go on a little more than I should. I know I have a tight time frame, so I won't go too long. But I feel like saying this, just to frame this for everybody. If you know that you are a partisan person, try your best to suppress that for the next 30 seconds. If we go back to the 2016 presidential election, historic election, will go down in history for many, many reasons. If we go back to that election, I don't care if you were on Team Red or on Team Blue or wherever you were, everybody had their own narrative of what was going on. I'm going to give you my narrative. What I heard in the 2016 election were two 70-ish-year-old candidates explaining to us how they were going to restore the magic period from their youth, which is the couple of decades right after World War II. Whether that was a vision of Ozzie and Harriet families and blue-collar jobs, or whether that was a vision of a federal government that could be very generous and expansive and do great things, they were both talking about the same period of time. Those couple of decades after World War II, where we stood atop the mound and everything seemed possible. Let me walk you through what this looks like. And if you've been looking at this map here for a couple minutes, this is a map of Fresno, California. I'm going to show you a map of Fresno, California, not because I think Lancaster equals Fresno, but because I have a really good map of Fresno. And it tells the story I want to tell, but I'm going to say, this will be a story familiar to you, right? I use Fresno as an example because I've got good maps, but this is going to be a familiar story to you. What you're looking at here is the boundaries of Fresno in 1897. So that's how big Fresno was in 1897. I want you to watch over time as Fresno matures. So 1909, 1922, this is that incremental pattern of development. Now we're in the middle of the Great Depression. Think of the city growing incrementally up, incrementally out, continuing to thicken up over time. Now we're at the end of World War II. You'll note that even during the Great Depression, Fresno grew. Complex adaptive systems, one of the amazing things about them is that they are anti-fragile. They actually, during times of stress, continue to grow stronger. But now we get to the end of World War II, and we're going to turn our cities into machines of growth. We want to stay out of the Great Depression. We want to build a middle class. We want to create endless prosperity for Americans. And here we go, 1958, 1970, 1983, 1995. And here's the last one, 2010. My city, Brainerd, Minnesota, at the end of World War II was 13,500 people. Today, it is 13,500 people. It's 10 times the area. So, roughly 10 times the amount of fire protection needed, 10 times the amount of police protection, 10 times the amount of road and pipe and everything else. Same population. This is data from a study that I was part of in Lafayette, Louisiana. And I'm going to come back to Lafayette in a minute, but I want to show you this data off the front because it delves into this part of the story, which is the really kind of, I think, the key takeaway here of this first part of the presentation. At the end of World War II, Lafayette had a population of a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000, so 3.5 times the amount of people live in Lafayette today. It's a huge amount of growth. If you look at Lafayette, you say they've been very successful in growing the community. At the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide drinking water to the people of Lafayette, Louisiana. Today, it takes 10 times that amount. It takes 50 feet of pipe per person. At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people to provide fire protection for the citizens of Lafayette. Today, it takes 51.3 hydrants per 1,000 people, 21 times that amount. Now, you can look at these numbers and say, all right, Chuck, like, I get it. That makes sense. But I don't want to live the way they lived at the end of World War II. Look at the prosperity we have today. Look at the high, quality of life that we enjoy. We have bigger houses. We have more cars. We have more stuff. Who would want to go back to living the way they did at the end of World War II? We are so much more prosperous today than they were back then. And I'm going to acknowledge that we have more stuff. But the question that I have is, how are you measuring prosperity? Because when we look at community wealth, when we look at the capacity of families, when we look at family income, when we look at family net worth, we don't see anywhere near the amount of growth that we've grown our liabilities. We've grown our liabilities by 10 times and 20 times. We've grown our family incomes by only a tiny fraction of that. There was an article I read on the plane today from CNBC that said 56% of Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck. How is that possible if this system of growth produces so much prosperity? What we have developed is a system that creates a lot of transactions, a lot of flow in our economy. But flow is very different from wealth, right? Flow is very different from wealth. And we get caught up in this conversation about government often because we are so federal government focused today in a way that our ancestors of long ago would not have been. There's this kind of debate about, the government is not like a family. The government can print as much money as it wants, run perpetual deficits, do other things to stimulate growth and kind of even things out and make greater prosperity for everyone. Let's not even debate whether that's true at a federal level. It is absolutely not true at the local level. Your city does not get to print its own money. Your city does not get to run deficits forever. Your city operates just like a family, with money coming in and money going out and budgets that have to be balanced. And so what we see is that we have created an economy that creates a lot of flow, a lot of transactions, but at the local level is not resulting in wealth creation. And wealth creation, in our sense, equals strength and prosperity. Let me give you an example. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at these blocks, you'll see that they're the same size, the same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure to them, essentially the same amount of public investment, the same cost to provide services ongoing. They're in the same neighborhood, about the same thoroughfare. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. That block on the left, in fact, all three of these blocks were built in the 1920s. Remember that incremental development pattern. Well, the next increment of out for my community in the 1920s were these three blocks. And so that block on the left, remember that pop-up shack I showed you from 1871? That's the 1920s equivalent of the pop-up shack. These would have been the people on the far edges of town who were going to build something modest in the hopes that as the city continued to grow incrementally, their value would go up and you would eventually get second and third stories and the buildings would become more intense, more ornate. The neighborhood would thicken up, all that stuff. 1920s. These were built, then we had the Great Depression, then we had World War II, then we have a completely different style of development that skips right over these properties and starts building out on the edge, right? This hyper out. These three blocks stagnated for 100 years now. The block on the right used to look just like the block on the left. We got it torn down, and now we have the new Taco John's drive-through. You all don't have Taco John's here, right? Okay. You can think of this as Norwegian Mexican food. So, lots of mild cheddar cheeses, salt. Yeah. We love Taco John's, just to be clear. I'm not ripping on them. Everybody was thrilled to have this transaction, right? We got rid of blight. We got something that met all of our zoning code. It met the building code. We've got now ADA compliant bathrooms and sprinkler systems for the building. They got rid of the on-street parking, so now the traffic flows more smoothly. They meet all the parking requirements, the sign requirements. The environmental people showed up and said, can we get some native plants? So in the little stormwater area here, they put native plants. The bike walk people showed up and they wanted a sidewalk. So they put in a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right there, but they got that stretch. So in our checklist for what a good project looks like, this checked every box. Here's what nobody bothered to look at or consider. That old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. Add up all those junky rundown pawn shops and liquor stores and tattoo parlors, $1.1 million. The Taco John's block, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same cost to the community to provide ongoing service and maintenance, has a value of only $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, the pattern of development that our ancestors around the world for thousands and thousands of years used in a complex adaptive way to build cities. You're looking at that development pattern in its infant phase after almost a century of decline and neglect, and it still financially outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. And everybody in this room knows what's going to happen to that taco place, right? 20 years from now, that taco place will be a used car lot. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. We'll be looking for some type of tax subsidy to get it redeveloped, right? We've all seen this. We have these in our community that have gone through this life cycle. This is a really compelling example, but I want to tell you that this is not a one-off thing. This is part of a broader trend that we see everywhere. What I'm going to show you now are a series of maps that were put together by a really good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy. He runs a firm called Urban 3 out of Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the things that Urban 3 does is create these financial productivity maps. Think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a field. The parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, that's where we say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where you get the most bushels per acre. Well, where is the most productive part of the city? Where do you get the most value per acre? This is Buffalo, New York. And I picked Buffalo, New York to start with, not only because I have a soft spot for Buffalo, I really do, but because Buffalo is kind of emblematic with post-war decline. Buffalo has lost population every single year since the end of World War II, continuing to this day. If you go to Buffalo, you will see the signs of decline and distress. You also, if you look hard, and sometimes you don't have to look that hard, you just got to have open eyes and open heart. You'll see a lot of beautiful things going on in Buffalo too. I really like Buffalo. But outwardly, you are kind of inundated with the signs of decline. But when we step back and we ask the question, where is Buffalo's wealth? Can you point to the traditional downtown? Can you point to that pre-Great Depression development pattern? I mean, that's it right there. It's a massive repository of wealth, despite the decline, despite the neglect. And that repository of wealth outperforms everything that they built subsequent. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over and over again in cities of all sizes. We see this in cities that are northern cities, that are southern cities. We see this in cities that are on water, that are inland. We see this in small towns, in mid-sized towns, in large cities. Every time you have the pre-Great Depression development pattern, you have that complex adaptive framework that your city's built around. Every time you see that, you see high levels of productivity. The further you go out in time from the end of World War II, the productivity drops and drops and drops. And we see cities that run far, far into the negative. This is a little town where I live. This is Crosby, Minnesota, right next door to Brainerd. I was, for a while, the city engineer and city planner for Crosby. A firm I worked for had a contract, and I was the representative. I remember going out here, and they said in Crosby, we've got some great stuff happening out here. We've got some great stuff happening in here, but these neighborhoods in here are just terrible. We got to figure out how to get some of this stuff torn down and rebuilt. And then we showed them where all their wealth is. It's in those poor neighborhoods. It's in the neighborhoods that are occupied by some of the poorest people in their community. I said I would come back to Lafayette, and this is a map of Lafayette, Louisiana. This map looks similar to the other maps that I've shown you, but this one has a fundamental difference to it. Those were maps of wealth, productivity per acre. This is, you can think of more as a profit and loss map for the community. Lafayette, Louisiana, and by the way, anybody here from there? They say it Lafayette, and I just can't bring myself to do that. That may be me, superiority of Minnesotan. I can't say Lafayette. It just sounds dumb. Are you with me? All right, we'll be kind to them. I happen to really like them as well. They are they're very interesting people. I just did another Minnesotism. When we say interesting, we sometimes mean that in a good way. I'm digging myself a hole. We are recording this too, aren't we? So, okay, let me say some nice things about Lafayette. They were struggling. They had a $50 million road backlog, road budget maintenance backlog. They were being pressured to increase taxes to cover this. And the mayor realized that if they did the tax increase they were talking about, they were going to take the 25-year backlog they had and make it a 23-year backlog. And he said, what are we even doing? And he asked Joe Minicozzi and his team at Urban 3 to come in. I came and was an assistant on this project to try to figure out and understand why Lafayette had no money. Why this city that had grown so much, right? I showed you 3.5 times population growth. Why they couldn't maintain their roads. let alone their water system, their sewer system, their drainage systems, and all this stuff. Why do they have no money? Everywhere you see on here, what we did is we went through and we looked at every expense the city had that was an ongoing expense. We mapped them all up. Where are the roads, your pipes, your sidewalks, your parks, your buildings, what have you. Then we looked at every source of revenue they had. Where's your property tax, your sales tax, your fees coming from, your utility charges, all that. We had like 36 maps, and at the end we mashed them all together and came up with this, which is a profit and loss map for the city. Everywhere you see a blue parcel is a parcel of land that is paying more in taxes and fees on an annual basis than they require long-term in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place where you see red, it's the opposite. These are places that cost more to provide service and maintenance than they pay in taxes and fees. And the higher the line goes, the more that disparity is. All right, you see the pattern, right? This is Lafayette's core downtown. This is a kind of a crescent of blue through here are some of Lafayette's poorest neighborhoods. I'll give you some images of what these look like. When I say you have a beautiful city, Lafayette would kill to have your downtown. Buildings that you just walk by every day that you're like, they would die to have that. This is their core downtown. They are working at it. It's getting better. They are starting from a different place than you. But stand back and recognize that in this condition, they are paying the freight for the entire community. That crescent of blue that runs through here, those are the poorest neighborhoods in the city. That is a snapshot off of Google of one of those neighborhoods. Now, just so we're all on the same page, when we did our analysis, we actually assumed that the city would go out and maintain the road and replace the streetlights and take care of the ditches. The fact that they're not doing that would only make the reality of that blue line go higher than what it actually is. Okay? All that red stuff, we all know what that is, right? That's the mall, the strip malls, the big box stores, the gas stations, the drive-through franchise restaurants. That's the windy cul-de-sac streets with the suburban homes on them. In Lafayette, Louisiana, the median family, back when we did this study, paid $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They would pay other taxes to the parish and the school district and what have you, but $1,500 a year to the city. In order for them to maintain everything that the city has promised that they will maintain, all the essential services that people need to have a house and a business, median families' taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes would need to get sent back to the city just to maintain what they've already built. There's no way that could happen. And Lafayette has seen its road maintenance backlog go from $50 million to $125 million in the intervening years since we've done this study. And every year they have a conversation about what roads do we need to maintain and what roads do we actually maintain. And understand what they're saying. Here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're supposed to do that we're not going to. Year after year after year. We often look at Detroit and think Detroit is some weird anomaly, some crazy place. Everybody seems to have their own story of what has happened in Detroit. And often those are stories that align with our politics or our worldview, right? But to me, Detroit is very easy to understand in a North American perspective. Detroit was the very first city. They were the motor city. They were the first city to reinvent themselves in this new pattern. They were the first city to have commuter suburbs, the first city to run highways through the middle of their neighborhoods, the first city to tear down buildings for parking lots. They were the first city that en masse had people live out on the edge, drive in, and then drive back at the end of the day. They did this all before the Great Depression. And when we hit the Great Depression and cities were going into bankruptcy and having all kinds of distress, Detroit, by comparison, did fairly well. And so when we got to the end of World War II and we were gearing up this kinetic growth machine, The model that we used was our most successful city. That was Detroit. We all just copied Detroit. Detroit's not some weird place. They're just early. They're just decades ahead of everybody else. When you take a really successful, complex place and you simplify it down to just parts and spread it out over a huge area, denuding its tax base and driving up its costs, you get the insolvency of Detroit. Like all bankruptcies, it happens gradually, then all at once. I wrote this in chapter 3 of my book, and when my mom read an early edition, she called me up after reading that chapter, and she said, "Chucky, this is a very sad book." I said, "Stick with it, Mom, it gets better." I want to take the remaining moments we have here and talk about some of the things we can do to deal with this problem. And the first time I was here a decade ago, this is the part of the talk that I didn't really have. My advice to communities a decade ago was just stop doing this stupid stuff. Like, you're chasing growth for growth's sake, but you're making yourself poor with every transaction. Just don't do that. And that was very unsatisfactory to people. They wanted something else to do. I'm going to give you some things, and I'm going to warn you right now that if you think that there is some big grand fix to all these problems, there's not. Like almost every complex problem, it really takes a lot of small things. When you go to the doctor and the doctor says, you're overweight, you have high cholesterol, you're pre-diabetic, the natural American reaction is to say, well, do we have a pill for that, right? And the good doctor will tell you what? It takes diet and exercise. So I'm going to give you a little bit of diet and exercise for cities. There's a saying out of Silicon Valley that we have found very useful. And it goes like this: innovation that happens from the top down tends to be chaotic but smart. Oh, I'm sorry, orderly but dumb. I've been up since 3 in the morning, so. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. Thank you. I did that so you would remember that. All of us, if we're asked, will say we have a strong, we prefer smart over dumb, right? We want the government, the local government, we want our community, we want to do smart things, we don't want to do dumb things. But let's look honestly at ourselves. We have a massive, overwhelming preference for order over chaos. We do not like messiness. We are a very affluent society, and we have very low tolerance for messiness. We will tolerate a lot of dumb in order to not have messiness. When I started to drive out here today, I looked at my GPS and I'm like, oh, 22 miles. And then I looked and it said like an hour and a half. And I'm like, how can it take that long? And I'll tell you why it takes that long. Because you have a traffic signal like every 400 feet. Have you ever sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning? Do you go through? No. Because we are an affluent society. We will tolerate a lot of dumb. We will give up our initiative to act smart so that we do not have disorder. If we want to see innovation, we need to become accustomed to a little bit of messiness. We need to welcome and tolerate a little bit of messiness. We go out and put out chairs at the bus stop, right? And the community looks at that and says, that's a great thing. That's a really smart thing. Someone should have done that a long time ago. Thanks for doing that. Let's go out and do more of these. Yeah, but the chairs need to meet this ASTM specification, and they've got to go through these 4 committees, and we got to get a grant from here to do it. You see what I'm saying? A lot of these problems are really simple to fix. But we have a strong preference for order, and so we tolerate a lot of dumb. If you want to see innovation in this community, if you want to see things change, you need to become an advocate for a little bit of messiness. Let me give you a couple examples. This is something in my city we call a tiny house. My ancestors would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on this, and we require people, if you want to build a tiny house, to meet all of the requirements of a house, plus subparts A through M of the tiny house provisions. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to go genuflect in front of the planning board. You got to do all these things to build what historically has been a starter house, right? We used to build small homes for starter families. They were very cheap. When people would have a kid, they would put an addition on. When they'd have another kid, they'd put a second story on. The neighbor would come over and help. They'd go over and help them. This is how we built cities, not just in this country, all over the world for thousands of years. We need housing desperately, and we need housing at starter prices even more desperately. Why have we made the starter home so difficult to do? Why have we made this such a difficult kind of thing to accomplish? Thank you. Well, if you are coming tomorrow, we will talk more about housing in the morning. Here's a commercial analog of this. Someone mentioned Muskegon earlier. These are storage sheds in Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan, a little bit like you, although I have not got to spend a lot of time here on this trip. So this is just a first blush, but you have some noticeable vacancies in your core downtown. In Muskegon, they had a lot of vacancies in their core downtown as they deindustrialized. And one of the things that they found was that they had a community full of entrepreneurial people, but none of those entrepreneurial people could meet the bar to get into one of those downtown places. Because to get into them, you had to do things like put in a commercial sprinkler system, you had to put in ADA compliant bathrooms, you had to change out the doors, you had to put hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvement into the building in order to occupy it. And for a startup entrepreneur, that's too high of a bar to cross. And let's be clear what we're talking about here. An investor is someone with money who is looking to deploy that capital to get a return. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who doesn't know that they can fail, right? They have a passion and an idea, and they don't think of anything else, right? We need more entrepreneurs. In Muskegon, they wanted more entrepreneurs. So what they did is they went out, bought a bunch of storage sheds, painted them out funky colors. They had a gap in their streetscape, like the one across the street from this building. They filled that gap in with these storage sheds. So now it's a more walkable street. They connected parts of their downtown. And they rent these buildings out dirt cheap to startup entrepreneurs. $70 a month, $80 a month. No long-term lease, no long-term commitment. What this is it's the minimal bar of entry to come and try your idea out. If you go out to these storage sheds in Muskegon, what you'll find is they're full of energy. They're full of life. It just oozes out onto the street, all this excitement. And there's people out there who have a passion for what they're doing, and they try and they fail, and they try and they fail, and they try and they fail, and they figure it out, where the stakes are really low. If you go to Muskegon today, you will experience these storage sheds, and you will be blown away. It's amazing. But you know what else you'll experience? Go to the core downtown. They don't have the empty storefronts. They're full. And a lot of the people who are in the downtown storefronts are people who graduated from these storage sheds. They got their start in some place where the stakes were really low. They were able to get proof of concept and move up and occupy those more valuable buildings. If we want innovation, we have to tolerate a little bit of messy in ways that we've not historically been comfortable with. Last concept. Yeah. If you were going to summarize in a tweet the first half of this conversation, I would say it like this. We built more infrastructure than we can maintain. And if you're going to summarize the second half of this presentation, it should be this. We need to make better use of the stuff we've already built. We need to become more productive. There's two takeaways from that from an action standpoint. One, we do not need to build another foot of road, another foot of pipe, another foot of any infrastructure, period. We have more than we can already maintain, and we do not need to build any more. Second, we need to figure out how to get more out of our current set of investments. And the way we're going to do that is different than the delivery system we used to create it. The delivery system we used to create it was very top-down. What is the grant we can get from the federal government? What will the state government get us? What will that insane DOT come in and blow tons of debt on, right? You have the craziest DOT in the country. What will a developer come in and do in our community with outside capital? These are the obsessions that got us into this place we're at right now. The obsession needs to shift from being top-down to being very bottom-up. Where do people struggle to use the city as it has been built? Where is this thing that we've created not working for people here? When we answer that question, we do something really powerful. We unlock an almost infinite number of projects that are all within our budget to do. At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step process to making the lowest risk, highest returning public investments that we can make. I'm going to walk you through this process. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people struggle. Where are people having a hard time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to emphasize humility here. Don't go out thinking you know what you're going to find. Don't go out thinking you have the answer and look for the problem that you can solve. Literally walk with people. Experience the city as they experience it. Find out where is it hard. Step number 2, ask yourself the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address this struggle? We have to resist the temptation to say, what is the state program we can tap into? What's the thing we're going to do 5 years from now in our capital improvements budget? What's that project I've always wanted to do that will fix everything? We're not trying to fix everything. We're trying to take what we have on hand and make this problem a little bit easier. I'm talking, what can we do with a shovel, straw bales, duct tape, paint, cones? Not to solve it forever, to make it a little bit easier. Step number 3 then, go out and do those things. Do it right now. Don't send it to a committee. Don't study it for 6 months. Don't bring in a consultant. These are just small little things. Go out and do it. Do it right now. And then step number 4, repeat that process over and over and over again. The amazing thing about this 4-step approach is we can be wrong more than we can be right and still come out way ahead. We can go out and humbly observe and say, boy, it looks like we're struggling here. I'm going to go out and do the next smallest thing here, and it doesn't make any difference at all. But if our improvement, if the thing we did involved cones and straw bales, like just do it somewhere else. These are low-risk investments. But when we do them right, what we see is that they unlock amazing things. They demonstrate to us amazing things. They allow us to see potential that we are overlooking today, largely because we are oriented in that top-down way. The exciting thing about Lancaster, the exciting thing about your city, is that you have such a great framework to work from. Lafayette would kill to have what you have. My city would die to have the great framework for building a city that you have. You had matured to a really high quality before we started this experiment. And you have so many assets and resources to work from. When we do a productivity map of your city, it is enormous, it's huge. You've got all kinds of wealth here in places that you're probably not recognizing. If we can go out and humble ourselves to identify where people struggle, if we can discipline ourselves to ask that question about what the next smallest thing is, we can find that we can unlock an amazing amount of pent-up potential in this community. and get that complex adaptive system going again in a way that's going to build a very broad, very strong level of prosperity for everybody. That's what the Strong Towns approach is all about. Thank you, everybody, for being here. There's a very sweet woman outside who owns a bookstore across the street. I've been told it is an amazing bookstore. Yes, please. Yay Books. I have 2 high school daughters, and they read TikTok. They used to read books. Now they do TikTok. I'm optimistic they'll do books again. Books are my love language. I wrote 2 of them. They're outside. If you are interested, please buy your book from a local bookstore. And the woman's sitting right out there. And if you go buy from her tonight, I will sign it, and we can chat a little bit too. Before we do that, though, I know we've got some microphones here. And if you have a question or something you want to talk about, please raise your hand, and we'll take care of that. If you're interested in knowing more about Strong Towns, we started out as a blog. We publish 2-3 articles every day. They're all free. Please go to our website and plug into that. And if you really, really value this conversation, you can do me a service. You can do our movement a service by just sharing what you find there with others. We need to talk about this with other people. You need to be ambassadors for that chaotic but smart approach. So please, take what we have. It's all free for you to use. Share it with others. Thank you. Go ahead. I can't see out there, so you're going to have to.
Okay, hi. Kevin Lynn. I actually live here in downtown Lancaster.
Beautiful.
It is awesome.
That's where I would live if I lived here.
The building I live in was built in 1898.
Oh, my gosh.
It was a shoe manufacturing headquarters. It's been adaptively used several times. Now it has 6 lofts, a bakery, and a salon.
Wow.
They're building a 13-story apartment structure right next door.
Yeah.
And that's all I fear that will be. But that's, I'm sorry, I digress. Yeah. My question is this. When you read like Jane Jacobs' book, Wealth of Cities, or James Howard Kunstler's Geography of Nowhere, they seem to put credence in the concept that some cities have they're in strategically very important geographies. Now, does that play out as you look at the profit and loss across the country? Because I was kind of interested to see that you found this everywhere, and not just in some cities, in coastal areas or something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there are arguments back and forth, right? Because if you go to Minnesota, Duluth is a really important city because it was the last port on the Great Lakes. It was kind of the access to the Great Plains, and all the grain and sugar beets and everything else from the plains would flow into Duluth, and still do to a degree, the coal and what have you. Minneapolis-St. Paul, in my state, was very important because it was on the Mississippi River, and it was kind of like the most northern spot you could easily get to, almost year-round. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that I know and understand the future, that I can predict out. What I will tell you is that historically, there have been places for cities of all sizes to exist. When I step back and look at North America today, the most fragile cities right now, we have roughly, I think it was like 36,000 cities in the US, something along those lines. Half of them are 500 people or less. I find it hard to imagine a future where those cities are still around 50 years from now, 30 years from now, sometimes even 20 years from now, unless they do very dramatic things. This suburban experiment that we've been on has been most cruel to those places. It has gutted them in a way that's difficult to even describe. I worked for this one little city called Emily, Minnesota. Back in the early 2000s, I was doing a plan for them. And as I was sitting around the table with a bunch of the old guys, back when I was not an old guy, one of them was saying, something about a dry cleaner in town. And I said, dry cleaner? And this was a city that had a gas station, a dollar store, and a restaurant, like a bar restaurant. That was it. Dry cleaner. Oh yeah, dry cleaner. And then they started to list off all the things that were in this little city that would have had 500 people, 600 people. Florist, dry cleaner, clothiers, multiple clothiers. Like this whole like ecosystem of businesses. Those are gone, long gone. And it's hard for me to see how those cities ever get those back because we can look globalization, but the way we produce those things and distribute those things, I don't see us ever going back to a place that would make that economics make sense. So I worry about those cities because they truly are wards of the state in many ways, and that is a fickle relationship. When you get a little bit bigger than that, I personally think that the future success of the city is going to be more based off of leadership and community. I'm going to use the word cohesion for lack of anything else, community cohesion, than it is any other thing. There'll always be, Philadelphia, New York City. These are completely different ecosystems. But a city of this size, if you told me that Lancaster 50 years from now was just a ghost town with a few people, or it was a booming place full of life, to me those are both equal likely outcomes. I think the determinant factor on that is going to be your social cohesion. There's a book by Tim Carney called Alienated America. Again, if you're a partisan person, Tim Carney wanted to understand what was going on in cities, and the prism he looked through were districts that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. He looked at the Republican primary and who they voted for. So in the general election, they voted for Trump. In the primary election, who did they vote for? And many of the districts in the primary election, because Trump won the primary election, voted for Trump, but many of them voted for other candidates. Again, as a Minnesotan, I will just pick on us. Marco Rubio won Minnesota in 2016 primary. And if you went around, Marco Rubio won my district. Tim Carney went to all these places, and he's like, I want to understand the difference. And out of this came his book, Alienated America. And I'll just give you one kind of snapshot that he said. In the districts that voted for Trump, you had a really high percentage of people that identified as Christian, but never went to church. And in the districts that didn't vote for Trump, you had a lower percentage of people that identified as Christian, but a higher percentage that went to church. And by going to church, we're also involved in the ancillary things that tend to go along with church attendance. Bible study, soup kitchen, homeless shelter, community events, supporting the schools, these kind of things. And in a very kind of de Tocqueville kind of analysis of America, his conclusions were the places that felt the most desperate, the most alienated, the most left out of American prosperity tended to struggle in ways that were similar across geographies. And places that had strong social cohesion for whatever reason, and he had a lot of theories about why different places had social cohesion, those places, despite having very similar characteristics to others, were still managing to thrive. And it was not wealth and affluence, it was not geography, it was not connection to water or amenities or what have you. It was how many people show up and support your football team on a Friday night, your high school football team.
Hello, Chuck. Thank you so much. This was a great talk. My name's Sean. I live and work here in the city. There's been a lot of news here about homelessness, which has been a sort of keen issue in the last year here. I've been talking to the city council and mayor, trying to convince them to decriminalize sleeping, you know, and there's been a lot of talk about all the services that are provided. The commissioners have been really hard on it. The city council has kind of waffled. Yeah. And it seems to me that in the line of the next smallest thing, I've been talking in the terms of the Right to Rest campaign here in the city and trying to propose that maybe the next smallest thing is simply to stop criminalizing those who are sleeping. And you know, we have shelters here, of course, but they're often full. And so I'm just curious how that fits into your framework, or if you've seen it anywhere before successful, or just if you had any thoughts on the idea of the right to rest, and that is one of these sorts of you know, small experiments.
It's a very good question. I don't feel like I'm qualified or really know enough about that particular strategy, except just to say that my gut reaction is it seems very kind of inhumane to criminalize people who don't have a place to go. But if you if you took whatever step that would be, and then like we've somehow solved the problem, right? Like that, if that was a first step amongst many, it would have more credibility. My colleague and I are writing a book right now. The contract I have with Wiley is to do 5 books in the Strongtown series, and the 3rd one is on housing. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. The remarkable thing about housing, if we go back a century, housing was abundant and really, really cheap. Homelessness was not like nowhere, but it was no one, the progressive movement did not talk about housing, about homelessness. It was not an issue in the early 1900s. But the housing was all junk, right? Like it was dangerous, it was, you know, it would burn down, it was unsanitary, it was, you know, 20 people in a tiny little apartment with no running water. It was things that we like would not tolerate today. The most innovative places I've seen addressing homelessness in a humane way are places that have gotten themselves in an orientation of this is an emergency and we need to do away with a lot of the niceties that we have inherited from a time that was less of an emergency. Right now there's a debate that's been going on, and it's an interesting debate in New York City about apartments without windows. In 1901, there was a law, the Housing Something Something Act, passed in New York State that required tenement houses to have outdoor windows. And that's been the law for, 120 plus years. They're talking about, because of the affordable housing problem, allowing places to have houses that would have no exterior windows. And there's a lot of people saying, well, that is barbaric. People sleeping on the streets is barbaric if they can't afford a house, right? They can't get in a place. So I feel like the places that are wrestling with that not only have not criminalized the behavior, but are taking the next step to say, how do we get a little bit uncomfortable in getting people into a place? And obviously, a shelter is a first step. A shelter that comes with something you can afford then, where you vest in, is a second step, right? I want something I can afford to rent so I can get a job and be part of this ecosystem. And then working up to that starter home and other things as the next level of strategy. There's all of that stuff that exists today, or that existed 100 years ago, that does not exist today. And so if you find yourself falling below that rung, there's no bottom to it. And that really is the problem that we've gotten ourselves into. So by filling those rungs of the ladder in, not only would we reduce homelessness, but we'd actually give a lot of people who are very entrepreneurial a place to start building their own wealth. I like to point out that the most entrepreneurial people in any city are generally the poorest. And again, that kind of goes against, we get mixed up in our mind between investors and entrepreneurs. Again, investors are people with money looking to earn a return on that capital. We need investors. Our communities need investors. Investors are great, but that's not an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a crazy person with a passion, an idea. And our poorest people tend to be our most entrepreneurial because they have to be. They're forced every day to hack their way through stuff. And when we can have a rung on our social ladder that allows them to get a foothold and get a start, amazing things can happen. And your first step would be, to me, an obvious one. Please.
Chuck, thank you for your great ideas here. A lot of your emphasis on both the challenges of infrastructure and the economics of sustainable development patterns seems to be at a very basic level, how do we get sort of one-story sprawl to second and third stories? And a lot of my work is in downtowns where we have many 2- and 3-story buildings, and in many of our historic cores, that second and third floor remains vacant because it's hard and difficult to renovate, and many of our building codes make 2- and 3-story buildings very difficult and prohibitively expensive when you try and put, the fire codes and all the building codes requirements. So, what things have you and others at Strong Towns been able to identify as ways to break through the barriers to incentivize filling those upper floors? I think you don't have to go very far into any one of our historic boroughs or our historic cities that related to housing and other things. Those second and upper floors can and should be converted, but it's not easy to do. Have you found ways to sort of break through some of those barriers and kind of clear the way?
Let me give you 2 observations and then two ways to think about this problem. Wow, that's way too much. Okay, I'll make it really quick. Observation number 1, you started your question by saying add second and third stories. I'm with you. I do want to be clear, though. I think most of what we built is not going to be here 50 years from now. Like that Walmart and that McDonald's and that Wawa, like those things are not going to be reused. Like when the infrastructure goes bad and the road goes bad, we're not going to have the money to do, this stuff is going to go away. So we shouldn't be thinking of like, how do we go out to that mall we built on the edge of town and retrofit it with $20 million of tax subsidies to get it to be a walkable village? Because guess what? You've got a great walkable village right here. Let's make that like awesome, right? Like it's already paying dividends for you. That's like your low-hanging fruit. The second observation that I will make is I get where you're at with like, how do we get these second and third stories activated? When I look at your downtown, I don't feel like that's the lowest hanging fruit. You have a lot of parking lot. Your parking lot is like your raw land. Like fill that up, right? And that might be one story to start with. Like just get something going in those places. And let's be clear, we often think of like every commercial transaction involves an automobile trip. And so we really obsess about making sure our automobiles have places to be. We're more obsessed with auto storage than human storage, right? Yeah, get it? When you can let a family go down to 1 car instead of 2, you're saving them the equivalent of $120,000 that they can put to a mortgage with that money. If you can let them go to 0 cars and let them Uber or rent a car if they got to go someplace, you're literally letting them live in a sense for free because you've eliminated that transportation cost. And so there's a huge amount of capital that we can free up by doing things differently, that we can free up to invest in this city that right now is just getting shipped out of this city. There's 2 thoughts. One, go study the Tennessee Brewery, is what it's called, in Memphis, Tennessee. If you just type in Tennessee Brewery, Memphis, Tennessee, you'll get this beautiful story of this 7-story building that they couldn't figure out how to use. And they had all, it was just like, because every plan they had to renovate this thing had to get the whole thing built all at once. And it was like, we can't scale it. There isn't the wealth here to make this work. And they were going to actually tear down the building because they couldn't figure it out. And what they did is they split it up into small micro projects. They started with the first floor, and they made it like a kegger on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. And they actually cash flowed that enough to buy the building. And then they cash flowed enough to finish out the first floor. And then they got to the second. And they just iterated along the way with like the minimum viable product. I've seen really, really small towns that have like nothing going on be able to turn their second stories and their third stories into something by, in a sense, like lowering the barrier of entry for artists and other like creative people who will come in a sense, like co-build the space with people. Here's the other strategy, and this one's going to be, I know there's some city people here who maybe have to wear ties to work and be all proper. So what I'm going to say now is going to freak some people out. We have to find a way in this country to deal with the building code. The building code, has become a huge obstacle. Again, if you go back 100 years ago and look at cities, housing was abundant and cheap and really dangerous and poor quality, right? Housing today is real high quality. We won't let you in it if it's going to burn down. We won't let you in it if it's going to be toxic to you. We won't let you anywhere near it, but it's also like brutally expensive. When we look at buildings like that in the downtown, we have created such a high bar of entry to make minimal use of that space, and that needs to change. This is what we have proposed, and there's no easy way for you to do this, so I'm sharing this with you in order to build champions for this cause. I think that if we have a building that we have a use for, we're going to put 3 apartments in here, or we're going to run a barber shop in here, or have a coffee shop, or whatever it is, we should bring our building inspector in and have them do a walkthrough and see, is this place a danger to public health and safety? Are there straw bales with gas dripping on them and electric arc over top of it, right? And we should go through and we should say, is this, a danger or not? Like, is the roof about to collapse? Is the wall about to fall down? Or is this structure? Guess what? This building's been here 120 years. It's not going to fall down. It's not going to burn down. It's occupiable. Then let's let people get in and get using it. Let's put a provisional sticker on the front, on the door. Provisional. This place has not passed full building code. It's not passed all the building inspections. Provisional. Here's the thing about a provisional sticker. Let's say it's a coffee shop. If you had a provisional sticker on there, my brother-in-law's, my brother, mother-in-law, follow me there? She's a little weird. If you had a provisional sticker on there, there's no way she's going anywhere near that place. I'm not, I don't want that. I want no part of that. But my brother would be there like day one. He'd be like, this sounds cool, right? Let that thing get 6 months under its belt. Let them run that coffee shop for 6 months. Let them rent out that place for 6 months. Let's get some energy in these places that are abandoned now that are just sitting there. Let's get some energy in there and show that whatever we put in there is viable. Okay, 6 months go by. We got our provisional sticker on the door. We send the building inspector back out again. The building inspector goes through and says, here's all the things that are deficient here. You don't have ADA compliant bathrooms. You need that. You do need that. You need that. My dad is disabled. My dad needs an ADA compliant bathroom. We need that. We need an elevator. We need a commercial sprinkler system. We need, this outlet can't be 24 inches apart. It's got to be 18 inches apart. Whatever it is, let's create that punch list of things and let's make them in order of importance. And then let's put a dollar amount on that. And every month, the revenue from that entity has to put 2%, 3%, whatever it is, into an escrow fund. And over time, as we build up enough money to cross that first thing off the list, Let's go cross it off the list. Let's take care. Let's put in that ADA compliant bathroom. Let's get that in there. When we reach the next one, let's go do that one. Do you see what we're doing? We're saying, instead of, here's the bar you have to cross before you can start. We're saying, get started, and we're going to use your success to fix this problem. That, to me, is what we need to get to. Especially in a city like yours. Are we really worried that these buildings are going to burn down? They've been here a century. What are we freaked out about? Right? Let's go make good use of them. Do you think they're going to burn down? Is that what I heard? Oh, you just had a fire? Well, I'm telling you this. I don't know what caused that fire. I don't know anything about it. But I'm telling you that the worst thing we can do for public safety is to have a bunch of abandoned buildings, or a bunch of buildings with nothing going on in them. Buildings need someone loving them all the time. We have time for one more?
All right, we'll take one last question. Make it good.
Yes, hi, Chuck.
I'll try to answer quicker.
All right. I own 2 buildings, like you can see them right there. And I own 2 of those vacant floors, vacant upper floors. The way I've addressed it is by teaching myself how to do construction. And
that's one way.
Got myself lead safe certified.
Yeah.
All that stuff. And I also own, I run a store on the ground floor. And I want to say thank you for your podcast, because I listen to that when I'm doing my renovation. And when you say, keep doing what you can to build a strong town, I'm like, yes, you're talking to me.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am.
Right.
Yeah, I am.
So, yeah. So, you also mentioned that we need, like Lancaster City specifically needs infill projects. And so these parking lots are
You didn't hear me use that word, but yes.
Okay, right. Yeah.
If you listen to me, I never use planner jargon terms.
Okay.
And the reason I don't use them is because normal people don't use them. And when you use them, you'll signal to normal people that you're not normal. So don't use them. But keep going, keep going.
All right. Whenever we do...
Yeah, whenever we build stuff in our downtown.
Whenever we build stuff on these vacant lots.
Yeah, I like that.
Bring in a developer, and they shut the sidewalk down. Big time. Like they put a chain link fence clear across the sidewalk. Not only the sidewalk, they put it into the parking lane. And so if you want to get around it, you either have to walk into traffic or cross the street, or most often you just turn around.
Right.
And you know, you mentioned, like, I am an entrepreneur. I'm that crazy guy who like is willing to not have a paycheck for multiple years. Yeah. And I've been on the other side of 2 of these fences now, and it is brutal. It is awful. And I've tried to express to the city how bad it is, but we still keep letting the developers do this. And it's not just that they do it. They do it. I understand that construction has safety issues. On a Saturday when there's not a construction worker in sight and you're looking through this chain link fence, there's a usable sidewalk that you're not allowed to use for a year and a half.
Did they pay their building permit fee?
I'm assuming they do. Okay. Yeah, they tell me it's very expensive.
Did they do the environmental remediation they were required to do? Did they do? I could go through a whole list of things that we obsess about and make sure that they do. What you're telling me is that your community doesn't care about people walking on sidewalks. Because this is not a hard problem to solve, right? I mean, you can go to cities where they actually have, say, like, okay, you're going to have runoff. You've got to have a silt fence. You're going to have this problem. You've got to remediate it this way. You're going to have sidewalk traffic. You've got to take care of it. And what you're telling me is that nobody asked that question as part of the permitting process or the construction process, and so it's not done. Because this is not a hard problem to solve.
That's what I keep telling them.
Okay. But we're on. The response
is, oh, it's an OSHA work zone, or
no, that's crap.
And they also give me, they also say, thank you for your feedback. We'll pass it along to our board.
No, I mean, this is, go to any city. Okay, we're close enough here to New York City. Do you know what New Yorkers would do if that happened? They would rip that fence down. They would literally like pull wire cutters out of their pockets and cut that thing down. That's what New Yorkers would do. And they would curse at him the whole time, right? I would have no tolerance for that. Because what you're saying is that we're obsessing over all these things, but this thing we don't care about. And it's an inconvenience for us, so like, OSHA, no, that's not. If you took care, you could do it rather easily, but no one's taking care to do it. So I'm validating you're saying, this is such a weird world, why couldn't they do this simple thing? You're right. Yeah. So I just saved you hours of therapy, right? Yeah. Thank you. Keep doing what you can to build a strong town. I love that. Thanks so much. Please.
Awesome. All right, well, you got your answer, right? You were right. That's what you wanted to hear. Thank you so much, Chuck, for that really thought-provoking presentation. Thanks so much for being here. I'd also we did the audience questions. Oh. Can everyone please give our sponsors a round of applause who made this evening possible? Really appreciate all of our sponsors. As Chuck already mentioned, we do have 2 copies of both of his books for sale, Strong Towns, which you heard more about this evening, and we also have his newest book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town. So we have those for sale out in the lobby. You're welcome to chat with Chuck and get those signed. I'd also like to invite each of you to join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Chuck will be giving us a presentation about America's housing crisis with some local leaders and responses our community can take. So all of you who are interested in housing, you can watch that presentation via live stream. The live stream link is on the screen. It's also in your program, so take that home with you tonight, and I hope you can join us tomorrow morning. Video recordings of both tonight's talk and tomorrow's presentation will be available on our Hourglass website and YouTube channel sometime next week probably, so please share those with anyone who couldn't be here tonight who would benefit from being part of this conversation. And if you like tonight's talk, consider being an Hourglass member. We do forums like this every month, and we'd love to share ideas with each of you and dialogue about how Lancaster County grows. So please join us to do this all throughout the year. And thank you so much for being here. Have a great evening.